So it's my pleasure to introduce Raheel Siddiqui, who is a global macro strategist at Neuberger Berman. He joined the firm in 2004 in this role. Raheel researches impending inflection points in the business cycle, inflation, global asset classes, US sector style, and many other important and fundamental things relating to stock selection and portfolio construction processes. His research spans finding systematic ways of distilling, leading, or confirming messages from macroeconomic quantitative data as well as behavioral data. Before Neuberger Berman, Raheel was part of Lehman Brothers' US equity strategy team, and he has written many articles and white papers relating to macroeconomic phenomena. Raheel earned a BS and an MS degree in biochemical engineering from the celebrated Indian Institute of Technology, and he also has an MBA from Columbia University.
Hello.
So with that, welcome, Raheel. It's over to you.
Thank you for the generous introduction. And the opportunity to speak, with students. I'm going to just share some of the thoughts that I've developed, through extensive interviewing of candidates of all sorts, from fresh out of undergraduate, to MBA students, and then PhDs in more technical fields. So I think there are some general principles. It's always a difficult conversation because the audience is, for some of the points and suggestions are very basic for some, and the same points could be very advanced for another. So I'm going to pitch this talk at the median student. So please excuse me if you think some of the points are too basic, but it just somehow, is, oftentimes missed, and I want to make sure I capture those points. I have my notes in front of me. You would see me sometimes reading through them, or at least referring to them, and the reason for that is there are a lot of points I want to, communicate in the short time that we have. And, the choice between a conversational presentation and something that's a little more, focused, I chose a little more focused so that I cover as many points in the limited time, that, we have today. I mean, a conversation like this is there's a lot of little points to discuss, and we can have 2 or 3 talks just on interviewing tips and tricks. And lastly, housekeeping, that I'm going to take some breaks in between, instead of on suggestion of Dr. Ansari, instead of making a 30-minute presentation and then taking questions, I'm going to take a break every 10 minutes or so, 10-15 minutes, so you can get your questions in before moving on to the next section. So that I'm going to start with a quotation that I find very helpful. It is that plans are worthless, but planning is everything. This is President Eisenhower. I think this is, whatever you plan, things are going to turn out to be very different from your plans, but the planning that goes into coming up with the plans that will put you in a frame of mind much more prepared to address the questions and situations that you'll find in a high stress situation like interviews, that would make a difference to what the outcome is on the other side. So let's start with sort of just first impression, the simple basic things. Please switch off your phone. Don't rely on that no one's going to call you at this time. It's very annoying from an interview point of view if your phone is buzzing or someone's calling, even if you reach out and you switch it off. When you walk through the door, walk at a moderate pace. It sounds obvious, but so many times people just pace through or are just standing at the door waiting to be invited in. Make and keep eye contact while you're walking through the interviewer. The handshake, please practice your handshake. It should be a short and firm handshake. Don't have a handshake that just keeps lingering on. It is firm. Make sure it's not lame, and it's not something that you're trying to show off how much strength you've developed in the gym. Try to have something in between. To a lot of us, it's quite obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people just sort of, because they're nervous or they are sort of anxious, they end up, having, it's okay, you can get past it. It's not a big deal, but it's not something you want to be remembered for. Another point I want to make is, Smiling always sort of makes you accessible to the other person and you connect with the other person. But there is another trick which you can learn, which is smiling with your eyes. So it doesn't make it obvious. You're meeting the person and you smile, big smile, while you don't know the person. It sort of sounds a little disingenuous, but smiling with your eyes is something you can practice. It's always welcome. It shows a certain level of sincerity and approachability as you are approaching the person and beginning to create the first impression. Ask the person, how are you today? It's perfectly fine. If before the interviewer asks you, you can ask the person, how are you doing today? And you wanna come across as neither nervous nor hyperactive. So don't be too quiet and be shaking, and try not to be hyperactive, both of which are signs of of a degree of lack of confidence, which you don't want to come across. Little practice goes a long way in this. Second point is when you come and sit. Like, what is the big deal about sitting? Well, you'd be surprised how many people are either sitting too stiffly or too slouching in the position. So the trick that I find very helpful, you may have a different trick, is go into the chair and sit as far behind as you can. So sort of, if this is the chair, here, and then slide a couple of inches forward. That position gives your body a certain degree of openness and confidence, and yet is comfortable for you. So you don't want to be sitting absolutely jutted to the back, and this is, comes across like somebody has put you through a punishment. So you don't want to do that, and you don't want to be slouching like this, because it shows that you are taking the interview too casually. Now, none of this may be true in your mind, but that's how you're coming across to the other person, and that's the sort of impression you don't want to give, because you most likely don't mean to give that impression. Another sort of topic I want to talk about is the sphere of influence. I've gone through a booklet that talks about interviews, and I want to try and focus on topics that are not in the book. Sort of, everybody can read a book on interviewing skills. These are sort of more of the tips that come from, the experience of interviewing candidates, and those are the things I want to share, and hopefully you find it, helpful. So sphere of influence. So this is actually an interesting concept. A lot of books talk about using your hands to express, if you are using, but how do you use your hands? So somebody came up with the concept of sphere of influence. So think of like a ball in front of you, this size ball. If your hands are within this sphere, you come across as emphasizing something So like the way I'm using right now. Here, something that's on your mind and you understand well, you're making an effort to explain it. The moment your hands start going outside of this, you come across as, or you tend to come across as, someone who's trying to exaggerate or say more than you actually know. I mean, if you're trying to tell a joke, or you're trying to tell a story, or you're trying to come up with, great, your hands can go all over the place. But if the idea is, but also tells that you're vocalizing more than your actual competence, and you want to avoid that. So try and keep your hands here. It's a good idea to use your body language. It is, you shouldn't just sit here and talk in a monotone. And that sort of, creates a greater camaraderie with the interviewer. But try and make sure it's within this sphere of influence, which is right here, and your hands are, it could be here, it could be here. That's sort of, that's less important depending on sort of what the context is. But try and not have a conversation like this. I've seen it too many times. People who are trying to lie or trying to exaggerate, typically their hands start flying around, and it gives you a hint that maybe something is not as, the content is what the person is saying is not what they understand or mean, or may even not be true. A bunch of avoids. What sort of not to do in interview? Close body language. Try not to close. Well, we don't know sometimes, and we do things that give an impression that we have, we are more closed, and then we want to be. One is just being expressionless. Like, you're sitting there, no expression on your face. It's great if you're trying to hide something. You want to have your, you want to laugh, but you're not. But it's not good when you're trying to come across as open and accessible and honest and sort of talk to me, here I am, stuff like that. So closed body language is, folded arms. That's another classic one. Don't sit like this. Don't have your hand here. This gives an impression. Again, these are not the things you are trying to communicate, but this is how you may come across, that you may be laughing, or you don't believe the other person, or there's something for you to hide. Don't put your hand here. Generally not a good idea in social situations to sit like this. But in an interview, it's even more so. Nervous body language, don't be fidgety. People, they are biting their nails, they're biting their lips, they are talking too fast. That's also, it's signs of nervousness. You can practice them and minimize if you have a habit of doing this, and train yourself not to engage, in some of this in the 30 minutes or 45 minutes that you have in the interview. The other thing to avoid is filler words and slangs. Very commonly used in society. Is one, yeah, yep, nope, slang, or filler words and phrases such as, I mean to say, that's one. Basically, essentially, well, the thing is, to be honest, these are all fine, if you use it once or twice, but some people have a habit of using them and thinking they're having a very smooth conversation, maybe with your friend, but somebody you don't know. I think it's a good idea to practice minimizing the use of, slangs and filler words. And, given the limited time you have, you want to be using more sort of, well, another thing to say, to emphasize, I want to emphasize, is not to use, some certain phrases which are fine, which are formal, they are not slangs, but they give an impression that you don't want to give. In my experience, phrases like, I could be wrong. Well, yes, but there's a different way of phrasing it. Or saying words like, honestly speaking. Well, you want to come across as honest, so you don't want to, say that, maybe sort of say that everything else you were saying was a little less honest. Or saying things like, it may be a dumb question. Well, you don't have to say that. It's a question, ask a question. Don't unnecessarily put an adjective to your question, calling it, and bring the attention that you're not confident of your question. Instead, you could use phrases like, it is my understanding, rather than I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong is much better than saying I could be wrong. May I ask a question that's been on my mind since I began researching this company? You see, so it's a more positive spin that's not, putting yourself down or your question down or your preparation down. The other thing to avoid, which I find often, is that some people in interviews, they talk in a way that they could have said the same exact thing with the same intonation with your eyes closed, meaning they're not engaged. They're interacting with you, but there's no difference if the eyes are open or closed. So you want to be engaged with the person. You want to have your hands moving. You want to make sure you have eye contact. You're reading the other person, and you're using pauses. Very important. You can talk and talk and talk like I'm doing right now, but it's important to pause in between and engage and see the other person's reaction. If the other person is, if the interviewer is getting bored, is maybe losing eye contact with you, has begun to, breathe deeply, or is looking at his watch, cut down. So it make sure your conversation with the interviewer has a certain resonant energy, meaning it's back and forth. You want to strike that conversational tone with the interviewer, and not get into, the person asks a question, you get into a monotone. The person then the person asks another question, you give a reply. An interviewer who is interviewing 5, 10, 15 candidates in a day is very, very tired, and you want to make sure you don't add to the person's tiredness, and want to make it a little more entertaining and engaging, because at the end of the day, you want the person to be remembered when the day is over, and put in, that check mark against your name rather than a cross. Let's see. Yeah, don't jump into long anecdotes. That's another one. If you have an anecdote, make sure it's already prepared ahead of time, and the key points. If it's a long story, that's, you're taking up the interviewer's time. An interviewer may have 5 questions to ask you, and your anecdote is taking up so much time that the interviewer can only ask you 3, and the interviewer doesn't have a good idea. So cut down on the length of the anecdotes, and keep, if you have an anecdote you want to share, make sure you spend some time thinking about that anecdote and the key points you want to say, from it. One point on vocalization, it's a nice to have. It's not absolutely essential. Most of us talk from here. A good speaker talks from here, from the diaphragm. And you can practice it ahead of time, and see, fill up your, you can fill up your lungs and talk, and see how your voice comes across, and then fill up your stomach and talk, and see how your voice comes across. what kind of vocalization comes out. If you like the voice that's coming out from your diaphragm, most actors do that. They're to project their voice and the energy in their voice. They try to talk less from here and more from here. Now, it's not something you want to, do in the interview if you're not confident about it. But if you want to work on your, the force or the power or the impression that your voice can leave on the interviewer and come across. So it's typically helpful if you know what you're going to say and you want to say it with all the emphasis. So speaking from your diaphragm is a much more powerful way of projecting your voice than speaking from your throat. If you can do it, it's perfectly fine. 90% of the people speak from the throat and they are heard and understood and communicated. But it's the 10%, who end up impressing you more. They tend to use the diaphragm, and typically actors, are taught this technique. Let's see. Okay, so there's a section, maybe I should, pause here and see if there are any questions. And the next section I want to jump into is some difficult situations in interviews and sort of what are the tips and tricks to handle those situations. But maybe just pause for a couple of minutes and see if anyone has any questions on the material covered so far.
You can actually unmute yourselves and just directly ask a question. That way we don't have to use the chat. If there is any question,
hello, good morning, sir. This is Bilal from AMU.
Yes, Bilal.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So, Raheel, sir, my question is that due to the current COVID situation, most of the interviews are happening online. So, could you please throw some light on the online etiquettes that we should follow for an online interview?
Yeah, so I think what you'll find is most of the thing I'm going to cover today are also applicable, for online interviews. Obviously, walking into a room is not, eye contact is valid. I'd say 80-90% of what I'm discussing today. There are some other things that people, talk about what is helpful. Obviously, you want to make sure that technology is working, the room is quiet. The one difference that some people have suggested, the sitting position that I mentioned, go back, push yourself back into the chair, slide forward a couple of inches. There are people who suggest that you should sit on the edge of the chair when you're giving an online interview, so it makes you more alert and sort of forces you to straighten your back because there is no real support and you don't want to be, so again, you can experiment with it. I would just say that more important things on the online, I've done a few of these, is make sure there is, that's what, from an interviewer's perspective, you want to get yourself into the interviewer's mindset. What would the interviewer like and not like? Well, you don't want your, cat in the background and, somebody screaming. So make sure it's a quiet and technology is working. Make sure you've tested it out ahead of time that this setup is going to work. So when you're on, you're on. What else? Yeah, and the rest of it is more sort of the one thing I would suggest is don't have your notes in the background. If you even if you think you are very you can read them and talk to the person, it is quite obvious who's reading the answers and who is engaged with you and giving an impromptu answer. Sometimes people even ask, are you reading notes? And then you'd have to lie or admit it, and that's not a good situation. So those are some of the things I'd say. The tendency to sort of, okay, I'm having an online interview, I can have my notes over here. Avoid doing that, and make sure the environment is fine, and the sitting on the edge, that's what I came across in one of the articles, and you can try with it, see if which one works better for you. At the end of the day, that's just a medium. It's more the content, which is sort of the emphasis what we're trying to. So hopefully you'll find many of the techniques, like a difficult question that we're going to cover, difficult situations. It doesn't matter if you're sitting across from the other person, or you are online. How do you address a question when someone's thrown a confrontational question at you, just directly adversarial? All right, maybe let's
Thank you so much, sir.
So let's jump into it. Difficult situations. Number one, a difficult situation is a vague question. This is, I think, one of the hardest questions for people to answer. It's not a question where you can tell me your strengths, tell me your weaknesses, give me an experience. Those questions are specific questions. The questionnaire is telling you what the interviewer wants to know and wants you to give a good answer. But here is a question that the interviewer is asking you a question, and it's not clear exactly what the questioner wants to know. What's an example? Or tell me about yourself. Okay, well, what do you want to know? What's special about you? Why should I hire you? I'm not convinced, convince me that, you would stay with this company 2 years. I mean, how do you even, so what happens? What typically candidates do, and the questions are vague, and I do it a lot. I ask vague question. One question needs to be a vague question because it has a purpose. I want to see when you don't have direction, how do you structure your mind? That is the crux of this question. A lot of interviewers ask without really understanding, but here is the biggest thing what most people do. Even 90% people, they start rambling, meaning they haven't given a thought how exactly they're going to address this question. They start talking. The problem with that is they don't know what they're going to say, how many examples they're going to give, how long they're going to talk, and it ends up becoming, a ramble. That's something you should avoid. So this is but there's a trick. You can actually turn the situation to your advantage. How do you do that? Give yourself 3 seconds, 4 seconds to structure the question and tell the person, I'm going to give you 3 examples. That's great. You have taken the situation and you're telling the person how you have interpreted the question and how exactly you're going to answer. I will give you, so example, like, why should I hire you? So, or tell me about yourself. Simple question, simple and difficult question. So before you start saying, well, I grew up here, I was born here, say, I'm going to tell you about my background, about my education, and about my motivation. That itself, I'm very impressed because you have taken a vague question and you have put some structure around it. Now start filling up, spend 30 seconds or 1 minute on your background, 30 seconds or a minute on your education, 30 seconds or a minute on your motivation, or, whatever it is. These are just sort of things that I came up with. You can have, 3 or 4 or 2, whatever. But first, before you try and answer a vague question, structure it for the interviewer. If you take away nothing from today's talk, just please understand these questions pop up again and again. And so many people trip up on these questions. There are very few people who actually are able to give good, succinct, logical, coherent answers within that time frame. So a vague question is a deadly question. And typically, these are very simple sounding questions. Well, tell me about yourself. Everybody knows about themselves, and that's the problem. You know too much, and you don't want to share everything. You want to share something you want the other person to hear and be impressed and is relevant to the position that you're interviewing for. It's a lot of thinking. So, before you say anything, structure it in your mind. If you're prepared, if you've done your preparation, you will find structuring is very easy. 1 point from here, second from here, third from here. Articulate it. I'm going to give you 3 examples. I'll tell you A, B, and C. Whatever it is, but structure it for the person. So you've made a losing situation for you, an opportunity to ramble, in an opportunity to impress the other person with your structuring ability in vague situations. Okay, moving on. Yeah. Second difficult question is a confrontational question. I don't agree with you. I think that's complete nonsense, what you just told me. Do you believe what you just said? So this is, sometimes it's the interviewer's fault that they shouldn't be reacting like this. Sometimes they do it deliberately to see how you react under pressure. How much confidence you have. Do you completely get intimidated by me? Can you hold your ground? So it's a pressure interviewing tactic. I do it, and I'm going to do it once in a while, especially if an interviewer is interviewing well or interviewee is interviewing well. I will make sure I put in a pressure question to put the person on the spot and sort of sense if they have short temper, if they have the ability to handle stressful situations, how do they act? I'm going to share my trick with you when this comes up, whether it's an interview like situation or if it's in a business meeting that's happening. Typically, you can open up with a phrase like, I that's one way to see it. That's one way of framing it. You say that you have agreed that this is what the way you're describing it is a valid way, and but this is only one way. Okay, and then you can go on the way I see it. So you're not telling the person saying you're wrong. You're not engaging and saying no, you are wrong, or let me explain why I'm right. You're saying, fine, I see how you're seeing it, but that's not the only way to see it. There's another way to see it, which is the way I see it. So you have taken a confrontational situation that the other person is creating and diffused it. I'm sure there are many other ways of diffusing it, but the most important thing here is to not engage back in the same sort of confrontation or say, oh, yes, yes, you're right, you're absolutely right. No, say, okay, I take your point. Maybe that's another phrase. I take your point. That's a valid way of looking at it. Let me share another way of, seeing the same thing, and which is my way of looking at it. I respectfully heard you. Now you please respectfully hear me. That's essentially what you're trying to say. So and whatever the answer is, that's sort of secondary, but this is an approach. The moment you see somebody attacking you, acknowledge, fine, I see your point, but here is another way. It's one way of seeing it, and here is another way of seeing it. Third difficult situation, and it comes up across geographies, political questions. People want to know your views on, you shouldn't be asking this question. In some countries, it's illegal, but it comes up more frequently than you would imagine. It is either a direct question on your political views, or it is sort of, one way. It's in the world of business. Well, what you think what Trump is doing, or, this is, people want to somehow get a sense of what your politics is. Never give them the satisfaction of knowing what your politics is. You can answer the same question satisfactorily along different lines and neutral lines. What is it? I mean, it's a question on politics. Start off with a nice quotation, which is Winston Churchill's, democracy is the worst form of government except all others, and smile. And then talk about, things like growth, development, the demographic challenge, and, what it means, institutional reform. Learn the language, have those language and points ready in case somebody pulls you in that direction. Don't opine on party politics, no matter what your politics is. Talk about the growth and development and the reforms that are needed, and sort of, the special challenges of a country like India, and how India is going through the phase in development that other countries have gone through and have gone through similar struggles. This is all, it's thoughtful, it's analytical, it is not getting into politics. It's talking about common denominator that no matter what your politics is, people think about and worry about. Um, you can talk about, how you believe in a dynamic democracy like India. Change eventually does happen. Sometimes it's slower than you would like. So you haven't said anything about what politics you believe in, but you've said things about where, material or substance of points that every political party wants to have an opinion on. Another point, okay, beyond these difficult situations, humility, it's important, and you don't have to go overboard in humility, but there are some phrases that show a sense of humility that you have. It's okay to say, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. Instead of, if you don't know the answer to a question that's a specific question, instead of creating an answer that's obviously wrong and you're exposing yourself, it's perfectly fine. So sorry, I don't know the answer to the question. I haven't thought of it, but let me try. So even if you're going to try, you already tell the person you don't know the exact answer, but if I were to answer, this is how I would think about it. It is much better than saying I am going to make something up and present it like that is the answer. And if I'm sitting there, I know this is not the answer. This is not even the right way of thinking about it. And you are projecting with a lot of confidence that this is the right answer, that I should be impressed. It doesn't work. So admit you don't know the answer. You haven't thought of it. You haven't studied it, whatever. But if you're faced with this question, this is how you are going to think about it, or how you're going to, this is how you would go about finding the answer or whatever. Questions sometimes people ask is, what are your 5-year plans? Well, the truth is, if all of us, or most of us, certainly true for me, if I look back 5 years at any point of time and figure, would I have guessed I would be doing this today, 5 years ago? The answer is always no. So I'm very bad at planning 5 years out. So it's not a good question. But how do you then answer this question? You can, start with a line like, if you want God to laugh at you, tell God your plans, and you can smile. That diffuses and then say, but, I have, there are, I don't know if it's going to work out this way. But when I think of where I want to take my career, X, Y, Z, so you mentioned that. And that sort of tells you that you are, not just an idealist, things of planning is very difficult, yet you're not completely clueless. You have some thoughts. Moving on, question of some specific questions comes up interests. So what are your interests? I mean, like, well, who doesn't know what their interests are? And you're preparing, like, I do this. But it's very important to understand that from the interviewer's perspective. If I am the interviewer and I'm asking you, what are your interests? Why am I asking you this? For two reasons mostly. One is, does it make you an interesting person in a way that I can relate to you? And do your interests have any business value? Meaning, does it make you a more likable person with your colleagues, a more approachable person, or with the clients? So of the 10 things try and find, and in some situations, people want to know if you have especially very stressful jobs like Wall Street investment banking, where people work, I don't know, 80 to 100 or 100 plus hours a week. This question typically means, do you have a way of relieving stress? That is part of your job, right? So I think so know why or have a sense of why someone might be asking that question. To say, I write poems, I collect matchboxes, I am an avid bird watcher. That's fine. I mean, there's a way for you to link it to the business situation, but the person really wants to know, are you going to be interesting to my client? Are you going to be interesting to the colleagues? That is why this interest is to the person is about, are you interesting? Are you likable? Do you have a way of relieving stress? Try and make sure you understand. And even if that's not even if that was not on the mind of the interviewer, you have given the person something to think about, like, oh, that's interesting. This guy would be popular with the clients or with the colleagues. And you have taken a question that you could have just wasted or been neutral about to converting it into an advantage for you. The question that comes up is, well, do you have any questions for me? And again, time is short towards the end. And this is your question to shine and show how much research you've done and all that you figured out in the interview, all the stuff that's out there. Try not ask a question that's already been asked and answered in an online article you found, or a financial press article, or or somewhere that's easy to so what's your market strategy? No, that's not a question. Also be ready to answer the question. If you ask me a question and I'm interviewing you, I can say, why are you asking this question? I'm not going to ask you, but you should be ready to say, what is the point? Why do you want to know? How is this relevant to you? If you ask me a question like, if you were to redo the strategy of the company from scratch, what would you do? Okay, well, even if I give you the answer, how is that relevant to you? You're not going to be redoing the strategy of the company, or something very basic that shows me that you haven't done your research. Well, where is the company headquartered? What is the market share of the company? Well, go find out. That's what I'm thinking, even though I'm not saying it. So the question should be not too lame and basic that you can find out on your own, and not so, pie in the sky, esoteric question that, it has no relevance, to you or the job you're interviewing for within the company. And the best questions are those where you've done a lot of research. Typically, I tell people, whatever your interview time is, if it's 30 minutes, at a minimum, spend 5 times the interview time in preparation. Minimum 2.5 hours would be a minimum, very basic. Good is 10 times. And typically, if I am in that situation, for me it's 20 to 40 times, depending on what it is. So if it's a 1 hour interview, I'll be spending 20 to 40 hours preparing for that interview. That's just me. You may not want to spend that much time, but that is completely acceptable. I think completely within a reason to spend. The more prepared you are, the more things you know, and even if you're not articulating all of those, it comes across in your pauses. It comes across in what you're connecting in your body language. Let's see. Yeah, so any questions for me? Make sure you've given it a lot of thought. Ask a question that has not been asked but is relevant to your job. It takes a lot of effort to come up with those questions. Just don't waste the opportunity. Don't ask a basic question. Don't ask a question that's been asked 20 times before in press conferences. Don't ask a question that's completely irrelevant to your job.
So, Raheel, if I can interject.
Yes.
So, when is it appropriate to ask the salary question? So, I guess you wouldn't want to ask the salary question when you say, if you have any questions for me, and then I suddenly go into something like that.
I think that's it's a difficult question for me to answer because it depends on the culture. Yeah, I mean, some places, if it's a company that is been around for a while, they have standard procedures, they will let you know, the HR will tell you, or they will tell you ahead of time what range we are talking about, and there's room for negotiation in some cases. And that's, you go for banking interview, the ranges are standard. If it's a startup company, I think it's perfectly fine to ask them, because there's nothing standard about it. You don't know their budget, you don't know their funding, you don't know your role, maybe, or distribution of cash versus equity. So I think it's and also culture. I mean, I'm not familiar with how it's what the culture is in India, because I haven't been interviewing there or been in that situation. But I think it's what I would suggest is use the alumni network, call up people and try and figure out what the salary is, or when the salary is disclosed, etc. And get some intel on it. Typically, it's not, unless it's a startup, I find it's not a good idea to ask that question in the interview itself directly. Yeah, I mean, you can, if someone's interested, you go to round 2 or 3. There might be a round with a human resources, and HR is typically a good person, to ask that question about, and they can tell you the answer, or they can say, we'll get back to you by talking to the manager. But you've put the question, because if you ask the question in the first interview, it comes across that that's all that, it's not very typical that that's all that matters to you. You don't want to give that impression, even though, it's an important criteria. It may not be, it should not come across, well, if I'm going to get 10% more, I'm going to switch to it regardless of the job. So, HR, I think, is the right person to ask. Anyway, so I think those are some of the ways. Not sure which is the right one. Use alumni network, if it's in startup, ask the question in there, wait for HR, to interact with HR. I think that would be my approach. But I think, of course, it's more culturally, whatever is culturally the right thing. Closing the interview. It's important, don't wait for the interviewer to close the interview. Know approximately how much time you have. 30 minutes. Some people have 30 minutes, interview. Some people have an hour interview. Approximately know that look at your watch and know you're on let's say it's an hour interview. It's a 40th minute or 50th minute, and begin to slow down. Don't rev up your energy towards the end so that it makes it difficult for me as an interviewer to wind down the interview. It's a candidate that helps you close the interview is something you like, wow, there's a lot more to talk about, but we run out of time, rather than, well, this guy is not shutting up. Keeps talking and the time is running out, and you have to interrupt the person rudely and say, oh, sorry, time's up. This is, well, very nice to meet you. And you don't want to create that impression. Be mindful that time is limited. And the other person, you want to help the interviewer by slowing down and reduce your anecdotes or energy, so that it's like a song, towards the end, song is about to end, because, the pauses increase, or sort of, the pace begins to slow, or volume slows down. Same thing for an interview. You should help the interviewer as much as expecting it from the interviewer to wind down towards the end in terms of your energy and your enthusiasm, towards the very end, so that the interview doesn't have to be rudely interrupted by the interviewer. Also, an important element of closing is gratitude. Take the opportunity to express gratitude. A lot of people don't do it, and that's fine. But if you do, you stand out as someone, with superior interviewing skills. So you could say something like, thank you for giving me the opportunity to meet with you, or for taking the time to meet with me, or allowing me to, present myself. And I wish you the best in finding the right candidate. May I have your card, please? And write a personal note, as a follow-up. Please, please, please do not copy paste. Don't take something from the internet and paste it. It's all too obvious. It's easy to research, it's easy to find. You can tell this is not, this candidate's writing. This is something copy paste. Please don't do it. And when you write a note, try and mention something that happened in the interview. Refer to it, something the person talked about, a question they asked, or a question you couldn't convincingly answer. That's a personal note. Send an email, or back in the day, you would, send a mail letter, but email is fine. But make sure it's a personal note. Don't make it generic, and don't, copy paste. Something that you can take from one interview to the other is easy to tell, and it doesn't carry a lot of weight. Finally, if you lose the battle, don't lose the lesson. And what I mean is, there are questions, there are things you could have done better, or you got stumbled. Write them down. What were the questions you didn't answer well? Rewrite the answers, to those questions, and figure out what is the best way you could have. Take those lessons from your interviews and your friends' interviews. What is it that they couldn't answer well, and put yourself in that situation. Maybe a pause here, and there's one more, section I want to cover, but maybe stop here and see if there are any questions on the material covered so far. Yeah, please feel free to unmute and ask your question.
So this is your opportunity to ask something. Also gives you some practice in terms of asking. So, take this opportunity and ask. It is rare to interact with somebody with this much of experience. So.
Okay, well, that's fine. Let's move on if there's no question. That's sort of, some miscellaneous things I want to cover. Before the interview, some elements of planning. It's good to know if the interviewer is hiring a personality or hiring a skill. Now, they're not mutually exclusive. You not just hire a personality with no skills, and you don't hire skills with no personality. But every job has an emphasis. So know if the personality part is more important in the job, or having certain skills are more important in the job. And tailor your examples and interview to that. Ideally, you prepare for both, but emphasize if it's about they're looking for a personality, don't just talk about, your quantitative skills or database skills or programming skills. Well, that's fine, but they're really looking for you as a person, and your example should be catered. So those are the two broad categories of it. One emphasizes skills, and one emphasizes personality. Know what this job is more about, and tailor your examples and your speech during the interview, or your conversation to that spectrum, which side of the spectrum the job is about. More personality related examples or more skill related examples. Use alumni network while researching. Give them a call. Oftentimes people are very open to sharing with you what is the job like, what's the culture like, what are the managers, growth opportunities, growth initiatives, and all of this, even if you may not use these lines in the interview, trust me, anyone who's done the research comes across as a person, who is. So I'm saying something as an interviewer, and you are nodding or your eyes are lighting up because you heard all of that before. I can tell. So there's all the preparation, even if you don't get to use it, doesn't go waste. It shows across. A person who's well researched is very easy to tell from a person who spent 10 minutes or 15 or an hour on preparing just before, versus somebody who spent 20 hours on preparing. Resume, you put it down. Resume is used to get attention and the interviewer to have in front of you. What sometimes people forget is to make sure you know your resume really well. You may have created that resume 6 months ago, and then you forgot what you put. I personally, like people who are very thorough with their resume. So before the every interview, go over your resume, make sure you understand each line item, what's in there. And if someone asks you to elaborate on it, in your mind, you should have the story ready. Why you did this? What was this bullet point? Tell me about this course you took. You'd be surprised. People put all these courses and you ask them about this particular course. They don't expect you to. And then you ask them and turns out they lied about it. So I do go through the bullet questions and different bullet points and find the one that intrigues me and ask them. So a person who knows exactly what's in it and who has reviewed it and is fresh in the mind, they know exactly how to answer that question. Also important to sort of be able to, your resume, you should be able to summarize your entire resume in 1 or 2 words for you. What is all this resume about? Well, it's about that you are a curious person, that you have a lot of drive. Those two things. That's the summary of your resume. So your own resume, you should be able to summarize in 1 or 2 words, and your goals, 1 or 2 lines. That's a very hard thing to do. It's not easy, but make sure you go through your resume and understand what is it that your resume is saying. Is there a consistent theme in it? Are you a driven person? Are you a likable person? Are you a leader? Are you a creative person? Are you very competitive? Whatever it is, 1 or 2 words, your resume, you should be able to summarize, and it may come out like, well, no one's going to ask you summarize your resume in 2 words, but if someone wants to know what are your strengths, so basically, if you go through my resume, you would find 2 themes: creativity and curiosity, or whatever it is. So it's important to know your resume really well, enough to be able to summarize it in 1 or 2 words, and your ambition and goals in 1 or 2 lines. Dress, one line on dress. The main idea of dressing is to draw attention to your professionalism and not to your shirt or to your tie or to the pattern that you have on your clothes. It's like like this white shirt is not the patterns that here that I want your attention to. The fact that I am I can come across professionally, whatever that professionalism is. Obviously, if you're going for a creative job, maybe a purple shirt is relevant there because the focus is on your thinking outside of the norm, etc. But for most jobs that people interview for, you don't want the clothes to be getting attention. You want the idea behind the clothes to be getting attention, which is your professionalism. Print, I personally like to print where there's a meeting I'm preparing for a few hundred pages, and it's a diversity of going to go to the internet, find stuff on the internet, interviews, analyst coverage, financial press, annual report, and go through them. Once again, you may not use all of it, but it puts you in that frame of mind that you understand what the company is doing a lot better, and you're not asking level 1 questions, you're asking level 2 and 3 questions. Let's see. Okay, what else? Yeah, I think the last point I want to make on this is, the questions. So it's a good practice to write down 20 most commonly asked questions. It's different from 20 questions you think can be asked. Find the real question that people are asking. Collect about 20 of them. The simpler questions, the very simple sounding questions, are the most difficult and deceptive questions. Write down the answer to those questions. Tell me about, like I said, tell me about your background. And first you will find you spent a page writing the answer to. And then the next step is to condense it, where you can still say 80% of what you want to communicate in only 20% of the words. Because you don't have time to speak a whole essay in front. You want to communicate the most important points is the least number of words. And a lot of time is spent in condensing. And you realize all these words are unnecessary. Make sure it has some examples. The examples need to be different types of examples. Someone asks you, tell me about your modeling skills. So before you start talking, tell them you're going to give them 3 examples or 3 types of modeling skills. 1 example of a complex model. 1 example of something that required a modeling that required creativity. A 3rd example of something that required advanced skills. This is just an example of example. So you may have a different approach, but want to make sure if you're going to give examples, try to have in your mind 2 or 3 examples of each thing ready. You don't have to use all 3, but you want to make sure you have them in your mind, and those examples are not all the same. They are very different examples, so that you can talk about different situations in which your skill manifested itself. Yeah, so again, 20 questions, 20 plus questions. Write down the answers, even if you think you know the answer very well, especially the questions you think, oh yeah, I know the answer. What are your strengths? Of course I know. No, you don't know. Write down the moment you start writing. And the other advantage of writing is, if you prepared 20 questions and you got asked the 21st question that you did not prepare for, well, that preparation, going back to the first line, plans are worthless, planning is everything. You can pull out elements from the 20 answers and create the answer to the 21st question. Or which I find very helpful, that the answer to this question I have not prepared, which means I should not search through my database. I need to get creative here, unleash my creativity. That will save you a lot of time, because maybe time to be creative and you are searching through your database and not knowing if you have the answer or not. So preparation is very, very helpful, even if the question is not within the questions that you prepared, because you can be creative or craft an answer combining different elements of what you prepared. Questions like, why do you like studying at, what do you like about Jamia or AMU? Make sure you have a good answer that's positive. Talk about the privilege of studying at a national university, how this library is great or something else. So students, again, you think you know the answer, write it down. What would you do to make the MBA program better? I just want to know how you think. Spend 2 years, you should have some ideas. What are your ideas? Write them down. You don't have to be ultra creative, but give them something that shows that they can relate to. Talk about the infrastructure. Infrastructure could be better. That's true for every university, but you could give more specific. We could have a library that's bigger, or we could have this, modernization, etc., etc. And that's fine. I just want to know that you have thought about it and you can articulate it. And I think, okay, I said last, but maybe one actual last point. I think this is helpful. You can approximate. One thing that's helpful in making a connection with the interviewer is to approximate the body language and energy of the interviewer. So if the interviewer is loud and has a lot of energy, it gives you a little bit of license to increase your energy and your volume at which we are speaking. You don't have to match completely. If the interviewer is loud, you don't have to be equally loud, but you can be more loud. What you shouldn't do is become more quiet. That's not good. But you can up your energy and volume to match that of the interviewer. If the interviewer has a lot of motion, you can have a little bit of motion. The interview is quiet and more thoughtful. Replicating, is the interviewer, makes the interviewer associate you with the interviewer, better. Eye contact is important. Don't lose eye contact. Don't look here and be talking to when the person is talking to you. Some people do that. They look to the left and as if they're listening with the ear. Don't do that. Maintain your eye contact. Make sure you praise the interviewer in a subtle way without coming across as brown nosing. Which is, say, well, that's a great observation. I didn't think of it that way. I never thought of it. So you praise the interviewer in a way that you acknowledge that, wow, this is great, or this is very interesting what you just told me, and this is fascinating. It's helpful to have some jokes and interview lines ready, but only use them if the situation arrives. If 20 such jokes and lines, maybe in one of the 3 interviews a situation comes up to use one. The timeliness is everything. Don't force your lines and jokes into the situation, because they will fall flat, and you don't want to waste that opportunity, or create an impression where the person is forced to laugh because you thought you told a joke and the person doesn't want to make it uncomfortable. Let's see what else is there.
So there's a question, Raheel,
Yeah.
in the chat. And I think this is the time for you to type the questions in case you feel a little bit shy and don't want to, air them yourselves. The chat is a great place to type, so keep on typing. So the question here, Raheel, is that it says here, I'm reading it directly. Hello, sir. I have a question that usually when we apply to jobs as freshers, and so this is important, Raheel, in the sense that many students from these universities, both from AMU and Jamia, don't have work experience before joining. So if you are applying for jobs as freshers while not having any related experience for that particular profile, because you haven't done any past internships or experiences, how can we get selected in this kind of scenario? So basically, maybe one way to think about it is what can you do right from year one to somehow improve your profile before the time for the interview comes. And the second is, if you don't really have it when you are interviewing, what should you do?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's a difficult thing, but see, if I'm interviewing a fresher, I know that. Okay. So you're not the only one who doesn't know that the 10 other people I'm interviewing are roughly in the same situation. And your question is with that baseline. So it's important to know the baseline. You're not competing with people who have 10 years of work experience. You would have a 5 years of work experience, because that's unfair. But you're interviewing, you are one of the 10 people who have roughly the same sort of profile, same university, similar lack of experience. Now, how do you outshine the others, at least make an attempt or make a better case for yourself? Well, there are two basic approaches. Find elements in while you're preparing in your projects, in your school life, in your personality that you want to highlight, right? I you want to work in finance, talk about the finance projects you worked on. What was, the one project that was very interesting for you and why? You just talk about that, bring out the element and why that's relevant to the particular job, or two. So you can think examples from your personality, why this job is a very good fit for your personality, or all the work you've done that has made you very excited about this job. So that comes across too. If I have, I, as an interviewer, I come across that you reached out to the alumni network, you read this report, you know what the stock is doing, all kinds of things you've done. The other people haven't done that, even though you don't have the work experience, but your enthusiasm. Now, you want to make sure it's not over enthusiastic, because I don't want people who are going to become a liability because they are unmanageable. You don't want to come across as unmanageable, but can come across as enthusiastic and hardworking, and you want to find out and you learn so much. That's very impressive. That's how you stand out. Like I said, use the projects, use the coursework, use the elements of your personality, elements of your research, what you know, and make a good convincing story for the person across. You want to present your best case, and you want to present a better case than your fellow students are able to make, knowing that everybody understands you don't have the work experience.
So I think the very important thing that Raheel mentioned is course projects. So if you really don't have anything, then think through very carefully all the courses that you have done, and if there were any projects, then you should be prepared ahead of time for the interview, so that you would be able to sort of highlight that. So that's one very, very important thing. There's another question from the same person. Looks like only one person is asking the questions. More of you should participate. So the other question, which actually came up before also, Viral asked the same question, is nowadays video assessments have become a common thing. So can you give some tips regarding this as well? So there, I think, one thing that Raheel, if I have your permission to add a little bit here.
Oh, please. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, because I have spent the last 1 year teaching on video, of course, not interviewing. As a professor, I don't do that many interviews. But so I think the one important thing is obviously that you have to have, and these are all simple things. Many of you already know this stuff, but maybe you need to be sure, as Raheel mentioned about the technical stuff, in the sense that you have to have a good internet connection. So if the interview is important, you have to obviously make sure that you have a great internet connection at home. Most probably you're going to be interviewing from home. Make sure that you are in a room wherein you don't really need a virtual background, because the virtual background can be very, very distracting. Make sure that the camera is such that it is directed, completely at you, so that you are visible. As Raheel gave many good points in terms of how to maintain eye contact, how to sort of mimic what the interviewer is doing. Many of these things are possible in a video interview only if the person can see you clearly. So obviously you have to have a camera directly sort of facing you, and your face is visible. Make sure that you check your audio, and make sure that your speakers are such that there is no feedback. So that's another important thing. Make sure that you wear a shirt that does not have stripes, because otherwise only your face will be visible. And it would be like the classic story of the invisible man. So these are all simple things, but they are important in a video interview setup. So, and also obviously one important thing that Ryan mentioned earlier on is make sure that all the other applications on your computer are off. Okay, you have to have your phone next to you in case you lose somehow some connection, because you want to maintain contact with the interviewer. Make sure you have the phone number, etc., so that in case something happens to your internet connection, at least you are able to somehow establish contact. But at the same time, make sure that the load on your computer is minimal. So all other applications that are not needed, you make sure that all of them are off. These are all very simple points, but could be particularly useful in video interviews.
So, Dr. I just want to add one thing to it, which is, and I was reminded of some of the things we've done for business calls. So let's say you shut down all the load on your interview and is focused on this, and the distractions are not there. Another problem that can happen is not because your computer is overloaded, but because your internet is. That somebody else in the house, let's say you're in the house, is streaming a movie, and so you have the same connection, and suddenly the quality of your connection goes down because of the load on your Wi-Fi. So a good thing to do is, if your Wi-Fi has the tendency to sort of come in and out, is to make sure whoever else is in the house, they have shut their phones, or anything that's very demanding on Wi-Fi. You want to minimize the load on the Wi-Fi, so that you get the best internet connection. So yeah, focus on your computer, but also on the other devices in the house that could be eating into your bandwidth.
Absolutely right, Ryan.
Hello, sir. Can I say?
Yeah, please.
Sorry to interrupt. Actually, my question regarding video assessment was not exactly the video live interview, but the video assessment that we usually they give us a topic and they tell us to introduce ourselves, and along with why do you want to join this particular role, and they give us some topic as well. So I was asking about that one, that how can we do a recording of that particular case.
Okay. So what exactly do you want to know about how to do the recording, Aisha? Is there any particular question on that one?
Not a particular question, but yeah, I did apply a few months before in a company. So they asked me to introduce myself, and it was a role of project management. So they asked me that why do you want to do this particular role, and what do you understand by project management as such? So what is your understanding on that? So I cleared. I think the first round was of the test. So I cleared that, but when it came to the interview round, so I was I wanted to do this recording. So when I sent it, then I did not get selected due to that. So that was the reason that I wanted to know that are there any specific tips for this? Because these days
Aisha, I'm not the right person to answer that question. So this is one of those things where I say, I'm sorry, I don't know. Like I was saying, it's okay to accept. What I would say, the thing that's still applicable to this is the structuring part. Write down what you're going to say, especially if you know what you're going to say. It's even more important to write down and condense, which allows you to say 80% of what you want to say in 20% of the time. That improves your effectiveness. So per unit of time, the information you're projecting, and then gives you some time to be, you know, use skills or tricks to be more effective. Use pauses, for example, intonation, voice mod. If you have a lot to say, you forget to do voice modulation. You don't use the pauses. The fact that you've condensed the words allows you to sort of expand on, more effective techniques like pauses, as I said, and intonation. But yeah, prepare, right? Script it out. What is it that you want to say? How is it going to be just slightly different? You don't want to be completely different that no one can relate to you. And you don't want to say something that's so generic everybody else is saying. So it's always that, this trick that people use to write bestsellers. It is just slightly challenging and interesting to the average reader. If it's too out there, most people will not read the book. If it's too basic, again, people won't read the book. You have to aim at the what I call the 115, 120 IQ, just north of 100, and to make it interesting, but not so out there that you need a very, very unique person to appreciate what you're saying. That's all presentations. That's all books, pitch that so that to keep your interest without losing you because it's too basic or too advanced. So that's the pitching philosophy I would suggest. Regarding, the video part of it, I'm not qualified to, tell you how exactly to make the best video presentation. But again, preparation, the amount of preparation that goes into your regular interview, spend the same amount of presentation. Again, in there, if you've prepared those 20 or 40 questions and written down the answers and spent hours and hours condensing the answer, you would find the same 20, 40 questions are going to be extremely helpful in preparing that video presentation, because that's exactly name of the game. The most amount of information in the least amount of time presented in a way that's effective, right? And now whatever, the nuances of video presentation, I'm sure somebody else much more qualified than me can help you with that. But the content part is it's no different in a video sort of, that you make and send versus, something you do face to face.
So I think, again, Raheel, just to sort of, interject, Raheel made a very important point. It's all about practice, right? I mean, even in writing, and I do writing all the time as a professor, I go over one page at least 5 times once I write it, because there is that much scope for improvement. And so to the importance of making it concise, maybe you should verbalize it many, many different times before you actually send the stuff. So the amount of practice that you do, the amount of editing that you do until it becomes absolutely perfect is important. That's basically the presentation point of it. And of course, what Raheel mentioned in terms of structuring is absolutely critical. And so again, the points that he mentioned that, I'm going to speak about these 3 things, gives the person listening to the video some idea about what is about to come. And then maybe based on that, it also structures your thinking as well as your presentation would be 2 things to sort of, think about.
Yeah, as a person who's been listening to a lot of this, it is very helpful if someone can guide me as to what they're going to say. I'm going to tell you about 3 things. I'm going to talk about A, B, and C. And as a rhetorical device, I think this is helpful. 3 is a wonderful number. So if you want to emphasize something, you repeat it 3 times or 3 different ways. 3 gets a lot of attention. 4 is too much. 2 is sometimes too little. Right? I say, if you don't like something, say, I dislike it, I hate it, this is repulsive. So the 3 somehow rhetorically is a very effective device, repeating something 3 times or giving 3 examples. Now, sometimes you don't have the time, so you have to come up with 3 unnecessarily, but 3 is the right pitch. In fact, there's even a research that says if someone has a negative opinion versus you, it takes 3 attempts to get them to neutral and the 4th attempt to convert your way. Hopefully that's not the case in an interview, But three is, use the number three to your advantage. But please, before you launch into anything, tell the person what you're going to say. That landscape is very helpful. I know you're going to talk about A, B. You got my attention to A. You're going to say A, B, and C. And now, okay, I'm hearing A, now I hear B, and I'll hear C, and then it will end. Because without it, even if you say the exact same thing in the exact same length of time, I don't know what's going on and how long you will continue. And that makes me very irritated on the inside, because, or like, will I get enough time? Is this going to go on? And you want to help me with that. The uncertainty of time is very difficult for the human mind to handle, and that's not no different for the interviewer. Uncertainty of outcome, you can figure out A versus B. If you don't know how long something will go on, that's very taxing on the psychology, and you want to help the person with that. That's a little trick. There's another question moving on with Firasat Ali. So conventionally, it's also okay to ask the assessment of the interviewer at the end. Um, what is your opinion on this? So I don't, I mean, that's, maybe it's cultural. We don't, in the US, that's typically not something that's done, but there are other ways. You can say, I look forward to hearing from you to show that you are interested and you really enjoyed meeting the person and presenting yourself, and thank you. You can say, this is one of the best interviews I've had. So thank you for, so you can show, it's important to show that you remain interested, that you would like to follow up. May I have your card? I'd like to, is it okay if I send you a note, after the interview? That shows you are engaged. To ask, how did I do? That's not typically what's done here in the US, for example. So you don't make it explicit because, maybe there's 2 minutes left. And I was like, yeah, well, it was fine. Typically in the US, you'll get a very neutral answer. It's it was good meeting you and hearing from you and learning about you. I enjoyed it, and we'll get back to you. So you haven't really learned anything, from it. And I'm not willing to tell you because I'm going to discuss and if it's the CEO of a company who's interviewing you, maybe you can ask, what are the chances? I really enjoyed it. I'd like to know, if you could say I have 3 offers. That happened actually in my case. And I went for an interview and told the people that, listen, I have 3 job offers, and I am not here because I am looking for a job. I'm here because I really like what you're doing. And those 3 job offers mean very little to me if I can get the opportunity to work with you. So, I am traveling all this way because what I've read about you is exactly what I want to do. So there is a time where they will tell you what chance you have, but it will make sure that the context is right. It's not a generic recommendation I would give. I would rather be more subtle and show a lot of interest in multiple different ways in continuing to have this conversation, and thanking the person and expressing gratitude and good manners and wrapping up the interview and helping the person wrap the interview well. That will leave an impression that the person would want to follow up with you on. From your side, you should show a lot of good manners, good interviewing manners, and the rest sort of, let the chips fall where they may.
I mean, certainly you should not ask that question if you thought that the interview went very badly, right? Because then it really is going to be problematic for the interviewer to give you any answer. So I would never ask. Yeah. I would never ask this unless, it's the Raheel situation wherein you already have offers and you really want to know whether these people are interested and you don't have the time to wait.
Well, also think of from a psychology. I mean, if you're telling the person, I really enjoyed meeting you, this was great, this is looks like a great opportunity for somebody, saying all of this, and you've done very well. I'm on the other side, I would say, well, we really enjoyed meeting with you. This is, I would say, something positive and something that's confirming. So it remains in the non-committal, subtle domain, because if I tell you you did really well and then you don't get called for some reason, I look bad. So I personally wouldn't want to commit to how well you did, unless I'm the CEO and I have the ultimate authority on hiring. But typically people don't. A lot of times people who go to interview junior people also tend to be relatively junior in the company hierarchy, and they may not have the ultimate decision. So, I would rather get a subtle answer and, make sure you do all the other things And if the person says, well, it was wonderful meeting you, really, I look forward to meeting you again, that tells you the person is going to push you. But create the situation where the person themselves, the interviewer, offers you that assessment rather than asking them directly. Well, let's see if there are any other questions. Yeah, please, you can unmute and ask a question if you're, hesitant typing, or you can type the question if you're hesitant, asking. Either way works.
Looks like
those are all the questions we had. Yeah.
Basharat bhai, we cannot hear. Basharat bhai, we cannot hear you. No, you are not audible. I think your microphone is not showing. Maybe I don't know what. Now we can probably hear you.
Yeah. Not many have raised questions, Asim. That's what I was saying, Professor Asim. It's a wonderful opportunity. Let them not miss it.
Yeah, they are waiting, but there is no written or oral response in some sense. So I guess
leaders, no. So they should take this opportunity.
Yeah, maybe while people are maybe thinking, I would just repeat the important points. There is no substitute for preparation. Prepare. If you think you will be prepared in 2 hours, spend 20. Yeah, there is, this is the amount of effort that goes in. Some of the answers preparation will be applicable across. Some will be very unique to the company. Very, very important. Write down your answers. Even if you think you're very good at talking and you know all the answers, you will be surprised no matter how articulate you are, how well-spoken you are, how thoughtful you are, what writing down your answers and condensing will do to what you got. Now, you're not going to read those lines exactly in the interview. That's not the point, but it will allow you to completely compress your answer into the most important points. And be also ready to answer questions that are not on your list, because your mind is much more structured than it was when so all the morass of ideas, all the things, now you have it packaged very well with examples of 1, 2, 3 examples, and you can decide you want to use 1 example or 2 or 3 or any 2 or all 3 of them. So that is, this structuring goes back to the quotation of Eisenhower: plans are worthless, but planning is everything. This planning, it shows, and whatever you do, it shows in the interview when you start talking, how well you have thought about it. And there is nothing worse than coming across a person who has not spent the time to sort of learn about the company or the opportunity or their own resume. Sloppiness is the first way. This person comes across as sloppy, there is no way they're going to make it to round 2, at least not with me. Whatever your answers are brilliant or not is secondary, but you should come across as sincere and well prepared. As an interviewer, I spend a lot of time going through the person's background, their projects. I research what projects they are, how to ask good questions on the projects, what their background is. From a different country and a school, I research the school. So I spend, for every candidate, I spend at least 30 minutes to an hour researching their background. So if I'm spending that much time, I want to make sure you spend. It'd be surprising. I work on Wall Street. I see people come for jobs, and I ask them very basic questions. Do you know, let's say it's May, do you know what the stock market did this year? And people don't know. I said, I'm asking you, did it go up? Did it go down? Did it not go anywhere? And if it's people coming for finance interviews on Wall Street, don't have the answer to the question. I said, do you know where the interest rates are? You're supposed to know. I don't know an exact number. Tell me what central bank is worried about. Tell me about the stock market of any country that you are interested in. So these are vague questions, but I'm giving them. You tell me what you want to talk about, I want to understand what your understanding is. And people trip. Those people don't make it. Like, you coming for, and I tell them, I said, listen, you cannot come for an interview, and I'm direct, without knowing basics of what the stock market is doing, or the bond market, or commodity market, or something. It's not a tell me this, it's about tell me anything you know. And you people reveal how little they know. So that's not, you might want to know, if I'm interviewing for a company, who the CEO, I might ask you who the CEO of the company is. What products do we have? What markets are we in? How long has the company been around? Basic things. Read the annual report. It's a public company, and whatever the CEO, because the most important initiatives are in the annual report. Some challenges are in there too. There's a lawsuit going on. So talk about that, if it's relevant to your job, how does it affect, this growth initiative that I'm being hired for? If it's not relevant, then don't bring it up. It's or if the person brings up the challenges and you say, yeah, I heard there's a lawsuit, that's fine. So, this preparation then shows up in so many different ways in your conversation. It doesn't mean you're going to repeat, but it's important to condense the lines as if you're going to, speak these lines in the interview, and you will not. You will be speaking different lines, but they will have the same element of cogency, the crispness, that the effort that you put in condensing your answers. That's, I think, the single most important thing I can tell you is the interview preparation, because that really shows up. A person who's prepared versus someone who's not prepared is very easy to tell.
There is a question, Raheel. There are two of them now, so just.
Okay.
I think they should tell their name. Ask him. The only iPhone is there on that.
Yeah, iPhone. I don't know.
iPhone's asking a question. That's great.
But who is he or she?
Yeah.
So the question is, it's a slightly off topic. It's about, it'd be helpful to have a lecture on stock market, role of behavioral data in strategic reports. Something we can think about, for another time.
There's another by Mamoon.
Yeah, so again, this question from Mamoon. HR asks, what do we bring to this company? Yeah, so that's a question. It's a question. It's a vague question. There's one of those difficult questions. Why should I hire you? It's more direct way of answering the same question. What do you bring to the company? 20 people are applying for this job that are very qualified. Why you? So there are different ways of asking the same question. I don't have an answer. Nobody has an answer, your answer. Only you have your answer. Why should you be hired? But here's the opportunity. First thing, what are the elements that you're going to be, before you start answering this question? We talk about what are the 2 things or 3 things or 4 things you want to talk about? Your background, your motivation, your preparation, your drive, your something, why you are. And once you have them, then start filling it up. So the first step is not to answer the question. First step is to structure the answer. What are the elements in your answer that you want to communicate in a way that the person is impressed? First of all, it's clear, basic. Secondly, maybe there is something eye-catchy about it. It's not something just, after you've written the answer, ask yourself, is my neighbor going to write the same answer? Could this answer have been written by anyone? Or is it a little more unique to you? Or let's say you decide 4 elements, not every element has to be very unique to you, but there must be something unique about your answer. Otherwise, it sounds like a generic answer. Don't give generic answers, because that doesn't distinguish you. It's better than someone who didn't give an answer, but it doesn't make you stand out, because if you take the same answer and give it to me and I put the same, there's nothing personal about it. There needs to be something a little personal that refers to your, how well you've done in these classes, how motivated you are, all the books you've read about it, or, how whatever they teach you in MBA program, you've gone beyond and learned, and you've taken this online class, or you've done this webinar, or whatever, if you don't have the experience, you certainly have the enthusiasm. Show that. You have the energy, you have incredible drive. You will make things happen. You will get it done. You are not a quitter. You are here to learn because it's going to be tough. This job is not the best paying job, but you are not here for the salary. You are here to learn. Whatever it is, make sure that's a very driven person. You're not a quitter. You can take a lot of failures and you survive. Now, if that's not your personality, don't, that's not something you want to push. But there are people who are like that, extremely driven people. In the US, for example, a lot of people are hired that have very little finance skills. You're like, why is this person here? Well, they are there because they belong to the US Navy. They're Navy SEALs, extremely organized, extremely driven, intelligent people. Whatever they don't know, they'll pick up. They may not be as good as the best in the field in those skills, but they are project managers that are incredible. Everything gets done. If they say they're going to call at 3:49, the phone is ringing at 3:49. They will be up at 3 in the morning if they need something done. I mean, there's incredible talent. So that person doesn't have any direct skill or the coursework, but the person still gets hired because the skills that they bring. So you want to highlight what is in your background, right? Why should someone hire you? It's an important question. When why I should ask myself, why should Dr. Ansari hire me? What have I to offer him? What is he looking for? So I will imagine, what is Dr. Ansari looking for? If I want to do a PhD under him, he's looking for a sincere student. He's looking for somebody who is productive, who's motivated, has some experience, has the skills. So of the 8 things he's looking for, I have 5. Let me push them and acknowledge the 3 that I don't have, but I'm very willing to learn and make up for it. Okay, that's the best I can do without lying. And then after that, I'll wish that, he doesn't find a candidate who has all 8 skills, and is, 10 on all 8. So that's the best. If he does, then all the best. That's what one of the lines was, I hope you find the best candidate for the job. Maybe that's not me, that's humility. But I will present my best case. I want to make sure I present my best case.
Yeah.
So
I think the very important thing that Raheel mentioned is the answer to this question as to why we should hire you. The most important thing is to first understand what the job is, right? Which ahead of time anyway, and then think of what you have to offer relative to that particular job. There's another question by Sidra, and I guess then we'll start thinking of winding up. If Motasim Najib can also add something after Raheel has finished answering this question, then we can begin the process of ending the meeting. So there's a question from Sidra, Raheel.
Yeah, so question is, again, this is sort of very relevant, it comes from, it's related to, what I talked about. The question is, what are your passions? So the same thing as what are your interests? You have 50 interests, hardly, very few people who have just no interest or one interest. But it's not about listing all the interests or even the most important thing that's on your mind. What are you passionate about? Well, think about what kind of passion is helpful to them. Yeah, so if there are 5 things you can be passionate about, and the number 1 is traveling, well, what do I do with your traveling? If it's a sales job, yeah, very, very interesting that you like traveling. I'm going to make you travel a lot. Versus somebody who doesn't want to travel because they have a young family, they want to spend more time with family. They can do it if required. They'll ask you what percentage of time is traveling, and say 50%, and they're not very excited. But you say you love traveling. It's very relevant if it's a sales job or a job where you go audit different divisions of a multinational company, different places. But it's not very relevant if you are, I don't know, a quantitative financial analyst, who is expected to show up in the office, 90% of the time. So just one location. That's nice to know, but I don't know what to do. So the passion, should be something that's relevant. If you want to talk about you're passionate about reading and about all kinds of things, it may be very relevant to a particular job. So always make sure you're answering not what you want to say, but what is, cater to what the other person wants to hear without exaggerating to the point of lying. don't lie, never lie, because it's going to get found out. Even if they give you the job and you say, I'm a great guitar player, and turns out there is a company party and you say, I know nothing about it, it leaves a bad impression. But you said just people. So don't exaggerate or lie, but find an element in your background, in your passions, that can be relevant to the job. Very important. Same thing on interest. People want to know your interests. Are they interesting to the company? Or is there a mechanism? If you say I write poetry, most jobs is irrelevant this way. Maybe except a job where it's very stressful. Well, that's very interesting that you write poetry to let out steam. So it depends on the position. So yeah, but these opportunities, your question, does it reduce your chance? If you're not matching the answer to what they're looking for, it always will reduce your chance. So make sure you do that. Why is the person asking the question? That's what you have to address. What is it that they're trying to figure out? Your travel interests or your matchbox collection or stamp collection is not very important. It doesn't do anything, even if you are extremely passionate about it. If you guys are, let's say it's a general interview, and and you can't come up with anything much, one safe thing to do is that you enjoy cooking. Okay, that is assuming you do. If you don't know anything about cooking, don't say it. But that is one that a lot of people can relate to. And then they can ask you what type of cooking, and make sure you have an interesting answer. Just don't say, oh, just everyday cooking. If you say that, make sure there's something interesting people can relate to. You can cook for your colleagues. You can show off your cooking skills. Maybe you can interaction with client. It comes up. Everybody likes to talk about food and cooking. So that's a neutral answer, assuming you know something about cooking, or you enjoy baking. It's something. So again, I'm saying this is one type of answer, but it's important to keep the focus. They're asking you this question because they have something in mind. They want to know how they can use you. They are paying you, how best they can use.
Muhtassim, Najib, would you want to add something in the end to sort of close the meeting, please?
Yeah, so I just want to compliment. This is just an amazing session. Clearly, Raheel is someone who has both, interviewed a lot of people and possibly been on the other side as well. So you're not going to get this kind of tips and knowledge in any of the blogs. I would recommend, hopefully we have recorded this show, and I would ask all of you to go back and take notes of all the valuable tips that have been given in this presentation. I missed, I had to take a call, so I may give a few more tips, but Raheel may have covered it. One is I do want to emphasize the preparation part before going into the interview. It is just critical, and part of that should be the three things that you need to emphasize. One is research the company, research the person and people that are going to be interviewing you, and then have a pretty good idea of the job description. Most of the time, good companies will tend fairly detailed, understand what the job is looking for in terms of your skills. So this will really help you a lot in terms of how you perform at the actual interview. Few other points. During the interview, when you are asked the question, don't try and answer immediately. Pause. 15 seconds, absorb the question and then answer. That is going to give a very good impression. One, you'll understand the question, and two, it gives the impression that you're being thoughtful. You are trying to absorb the question before you actually. So don't be in a rush to answer the questions. If you don't understand, feel free to ask for clarification. Sometimes these questions, especially on the technical side, which is where I live in, they may not be very clear. So there is nothing wrong in asking for clarification of a question that you didn't understand. And one other thing, there are times where the question, you may just have no clue. And it is okay hopefully it should not be the case. It is okay to say that you don't know rather than try and manufacture an answer which is just not going to give a good impression of yourself.
That's right.
And I think the last thing is most interviewers at the end of the interview will ask if you have any questions. Be prepared. You know, when you do your preparation, have a list of 2 or 3 relevant questions that you want to ask about the job, about the company, about the role, about the culture. Just keep it to the magic number that Raheel said, which is not more than 3, depending on how much time you have. And last, I want to mention, I think this was a question, whether you should try and get feedback on your performance. I would give a very simple answer, just don't, especially at the entry level. Don't disclose that you have offers. You know, there are cases when you get to the seniority of Raheel where it may be an advantage, but at entry level, you know, don't disclose that you have offers, and don't ask for feedback right away. For all of the reasons that Raheel mentioned, you're just not going to get that answer 99.9% of the time. But other than that, I think Raheel did a wonderful job, and you know, you guys should sort of soak in and absorb all the knowledge that you got in this session. Back to you, Asim.
Thank you very much, Raheel. You know, I learned a lot in this process, even though I probably won't be interviewing anytime in the near future, but certainly very, very insightful, very informative, and I'm thankful that you, you know, took the time to, you know, structure it in such a wonderful fashion. So once again, thank you very much. It was a pleasure listening to you, and I guess it's already quite late now, so let's you know, wind up.
Dr. Ansari, thank you for giving me the opportunity to, you know, present some of the thoughts with the group, you know, and your mission, which is very dear to you and dear to me. And thank you, you know, now, and thank you everyone who is on the call this late in the evening. You know, this was supposed to be a 30-minute presentation. It turned out to be a lot more. And the fact that you stuck with it, I greatly appreciate that. You know, hopefully we'll have more sessions in the future on different topics. And I look forward to engaging with you and interacting with you and more of you in the near future.
Thank you. I have saved the chat, and I think with that we will sort of, you know, end it.